I think what we were going to talk about was linked to the dynamic environment and change. So the fact that as much as you might plan for something, um, the patterns in life seem to be that things get thrown up that might be unexpected, that might then change your plans, for example.
Yep. Do you have an example, maybe?
I was doing some work at a school, delivering some forest school, and I went in. I'd planned the session, and then as soon as I arrived, the teacher said, "Ah, your session is now going to be cut dramatically," um, and I just said, "Okay, that's fine. I'll adapt." Um, to that situation. Also, another example is my daughter just coming back from school and talking loudly and moaning about something behind me while I'm trying to collect my thoughts together, which was tricky.
So I think, yeah, distractions is probably a part of it,
Yeah,
but disruptions is what we're talking about, aren't we? Where, I've had it probably 3 or 4 times in the last week or last weeks where I'm delivering some kind of session or workshop to a customer, and they're asking me an hour before the session or during the session to change the content, change the scope, include some participants, change their participation, whatever. Um, and being generally able to take that with a smile, and still deliver something that they are very satisfied with is I mean, I at this point I don't even see it as a challenge anymore, to be honest. But it is a thing. It's a thing that, at least to a certain extent, and I think this is what sort of triggered us, um, people seem to be impressed by, or it seems to exceed their expectation when you are able to do that. People seem to expect you to just deliver what you've promised, and if it goes outside of that, then have to sort of renegotiate or restart from scratch. Um, and I think this goes, obviously we're just giving 2 examples of a professional context, interacting with an external party, but that thing can also happen inside a group of people or inside a
yeah,
team where theoretically you have all variables under control, but actually you don't. So um, I think you mentioned something about seeing it as an opportunity or actually as an advantage when this kind of thing happens. Do you maybe want to
yeah.
share?
So I think that the pleasant surprise from people, if you're able to quickly adapt, if you like, and change and fit in with the new reality, the new requirements that is being kind of thrust upon you. I think that is probably less normal, that people are able to just do that with a smile and adjust very, very quickly without getting irritated or annoyed or showing any type of distress, whether that's verbally um, verbally coming back to the person or showing non-verbal communication that shows that you're a bit peeved by it. Um, so I think, that being said, if you are able to ex- quickly accept that the environment has changed, and then be calm about it, and and take some sort of conscious step to adapt to their new requirements, then I think that is highly likely to exceed their expectations. So I think there's a real opportunity there, um, if you're able to do that. Now, there may be some negatives if you're doing that regularly, and we can talk about that briefly, but I think essentially there's a range of things that could have happened. Someone could be, for example, organizing some sort of convention, with a lot of visitors and some guest speakers, for example, which is an example of a potentially stressful situation. and they might not have a speaker. Okay, I can give you an example now. I was doing some work running a course at a college, further education college, and I went to a seminar that was ran by the Department for Education up in London. And I was in the audience, and they had a panel talking about supported employment, and one of the speakers didn't arrive. They were one of the main speakers, and they said, "Oh, sorry, this person isn't here who would be talking about supported employment initiative within colleges." And my hand went up, and I said, "Well, I'll talk if you like on the panel, because I know I know something about that." And that was partly me pushing my boundaries to challenge myself, because there was about 40 people in the audience and I hadn't prepared anything. But that was me taking an opportunity to exceed expectations and to go up there and to hopefully add some value to that situation, which potentially gets someone out of potentially helps solve a problem for someone, if you like.
So I think that the main challenge, which both of us don't seem to really have, is that a lot of people get really nervous when they need to perform in whatever way, shape or form that is. And then any disruption to what they've prepared will completely throw them off, stress them out even more, maybe make them panic, maybe make them have some kind of breakdown or something. So I think one thing that you mentioned, actually seeing it as an opportunity to exceed expectations, helps to reframe that challenge. Do you think there are other elements, there are other components that make you more resilient to that kind of stuff?
Yes. So I think the reframing is something that I've learnt through a number of other things that I've done, and one of those is the sword fighting and the teaching and stuff that I've done in the past. But the other one is working in the various roles that by their very nature have a high level of disruption. So that disruption is frequent. So those frequent disruptions in things, sometimes due to the nature of the people I was working with, younger people, people have significant challenges in getting into work, if you like, or working for a few organisations that had very, very poor leadership and poor structures in place, which caused issues. That allowed me to practice that. Now, I've seen people that have been completely worn down by those things and stressed out by those things, and it's really affected them. But I would tend to take that as a challenge, and again as an opportunity, and an opportunity to reframe, an opportunity to achieve when everything is against me, if you like. So for me, I'm not immune to feeling nervous before taking on a certain significant task which has certain pressures, by any means. But as soon as a situation looks like it's going wrong, or things are going to be more difficult, that actually reduces the pressure for me. My way of reframing makes that pressure reduced. So that's something that I think I've learned over time.
It's interesting because for me, I probably see it in a similar-ish way, where I know that I'm really, so first of all, most of the times when I'm presenting or when I'm talking about stuff, I'm in a field where I'm reasonably confident, reasonably comfortable. You know, there is a reason why I am talking, right? there is always a reason why you are the person presenting. So to a certain extent, you have some legitimacy standing there. And the second thing is, I know from being exposed to these changing environments a lot that I'm also very good at this adapting thing. So actually, I might be on that same sort of, let's say, part of the spectrum as you are, where I actually become more confident when stuff changes, because I know I will be good there, or I have a good chance of being good in this changing environment, and people are likely to be positively surprised by my capacity to adapt.
Absolutely.
And so I'm likely to have actually more positive feedback now that they've thrown some kind of spanner into the works, and I'll just be able to sail around it, no problem.
Because the success criteria is probably changed in their head. It's become a lot more difficult. So I think people are expecting less than they might have expected already, because the environment has become more difficult.
Lowering expectations, yeah.
I think it does. So if you're able to at least achieve what you originally set out, then you are probably you're exceeding expectations rather than delivering exactly what they wanted, if you like.
So I'm wondering whether both of us are consciously or unconsciously practicing this, because I know that for some of the things that you do very often, the preparation time that you have is relatively limited, which means that it is not that hard for you to on the spot come up with a change or part of a new exercise or program or format or whatever, because you've already actually practiced at doing that relatively quickly.
Yeah.
You know, if you sat down every time that you do, for instance, a lesson, every time you sat down and you prepared it for 6 hours, if you then were asked to change it in 30 seconds, that would possibly stress you out more. Cutting down that preparation time by relying on some of those modules that you have, those patterns that you have in your repertoire, allows you. I think it comes back to something that I also teach in the storytelling workshop that I do. Is about these jazz musicians, right? Jazz musicians play great solos and they're great at improvising, but actually what they do is they string together a number of patterns that they know and have rehearsed a lot, and the transitions in between them are improvised, and the order in which they're putting them are improvised. But actually, when I improvise a new thing on the spot, I'm not making it up from scratch. Sometimes I am, but most often I will take from other components that I know and I've done already, and I will put them together in a new way or without much preparation.
Are you suggesting that we might have built up a store of adaptive building blocks, essentially?
Which actually ties back to our conversation from last week of saying that I am able to go into those blocks from also other disciplines.
Yes.
So if I'm sitting in a design thinking workshop and I'm faced with a problem that I have solved in a Scrum session, you know, those are reasonably close together, but even in a sword fighting lesson, I'll take that component that I have from the sword fighting lesson and apply it in my design thinking context, because that's the best tool I have for the job at that time. And another thing that I wanted, I don't know if you do this, but I normally try as much as I can to ask when I'm running some kind of session with a group of people. I normally ask people's expectations up front. And that's openly exposing myself to people changing the scope of what we're doing every single time. And so even though it's also the opportunity for me to say, well, no, your expectations are wrong, it's potentially exposing myself to that and practicing that changing and dynamic environment.
It sounds like I don't do that as much as you do.
Okay.
I mean, I try to take a student-led approach as part of my teaching sessions, which I think links into what you're saying. So that's opening yourself up to the risk that people are going to ask you some very difficult questions, but actually the other side, the positive side of that, the benefit side, is that that could be so much more applicable. Well, it's certainly going to be
Mm.
much more applicable
Mm.
to that individual, but it could be much more applicable to the group. So to be able to go off on a, let's call it a tangent, to be able to go off on a student-led tangent could theoretically be the most valuable thing that you do as part of the content that you're delivering.
So I'm writing it down because I think you see it in the same way, but correct me if I'm wrong. When you're talking about a student-led approach, it's much less me against them. It's much more about us together trying to achieve something. Because in the end, if you've been asked or if you've taken the initiative and other people have agreed to join to do this thing together, you probably have a goal that you want to achieve together. So it's
I
not
mean,
a
I think
question of them proving you wrong or
no.
whatever.
I mean, I can give you an example of that, which is a tool that I use in that context. Because one of the things that I think makes maybe newer people that are delivering content, running some sort of workshop or something like that, more and more nervous is this perception in their mind: what if I get asked a difficult question? And in that context, if someone asks me a really difficult question that I don't know the answer to, again, that I now have a tool which I've used in the past, which allows me to tackle that and potentially exceed expectations. And what I will do is I will say, that's a fantastic question. I'm not quite sure of the answer to that. Why don't we put that out to the group?
Yeah.
Why don't we solve that together? I'm sure people have got experience as part of this group of people that can help us. And then I slip into, rather than a facilitator of a workshop role, rather than a person delivering a workshop, I slip into a facilitator role, and I will help coordinate that group of people to come up with the best solution to that other person's problem.
Yep.
So it becomes much more of a collaborative
Yep.
approach rather than a teacher-student approach, which a teacher-student approach I think is good in some situations. Maybe if something is really specialized and they're trying to pass on the building blocks, or if some information needs to be transferred really quickly and there isn't time for discussion, then maybe. But I much prefer that collaborative activity where even if people have no knowledge of what you're speaking about, you can say, well, have you done something similar? And can you use some of your experience, your life experience or experience in another situation, to give you an idea of, to give you a head start on this new subject?
And I think this potentially vulnerability to be able to say, well, actually, I don't have a ready answer, is usually a completely appropriate response. And people realize they're putting you on the spot to a certain extent, and so they won't hold it against you if you say, at the very least, I need to think about that for a second, or let me get back to you on that later.
Absolutely.
Or and any variation of that.
I think it also humanizes you. It makes you seem like you're more human. That you have got, there are gaps. I'm using an absolutism there, which I try to avoid, but actually I'm very frequently suspicious of someone that is telling me they know everything and they have very quick answers to everything. I become suspicious of that, because life isn't that simple. And because of the dynamic environment, there is highly unlikely to be one correct answer to any type of problem. So if someone, for me, says, oh, do you know what? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. But as you say, I'll get back to you, or I'll research that, or I might say something like, "Oh, great question. Are you able to, you know, maybe you should, I'll signpost you to this particular place, and maybe next time we have a meeting, you could feedback on that, because that's fantastic." So again, it gives you a possibility to engage more with an individual, and connect more with an individual, and potentially give some encouragement for them to find out the answer themselves, rather than me, the all-powerful kind of instructor, knowing everything and coming up with all the answers.
So I think part of what we've just been saying is about giving yourself the space to adapt to this new situation, because you've now, let's say you've now accepted that the reality around you has changed. You have managed to not have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
You have the resources at hand, like we said, in those modules or patterns that you can use to create a new solution. Now you still need to create some space for yourself. Even when it's something really quick, you still need, half a second or a second to come up with a solution at the very least. So creating that space for yourself, I think, is very important. And you can do that in various ways, like we've just discussed. Now, I think then, what we said, that the last step is obviously then you need to execute on it, which if we're talking about stuff that we are familiar with, not stuff that we have completely invented from scratch, then I don't think there is any magic or rocket science in there, because effectively now you're executing something that it's just you weren't expecting to execute specifically that bit, but it's something else. But I think something that you mentioned in the beginning, and maybe we'll take that as a sort of closing thought or point, is what happens if you do this all the time. Because you say, in the beginning, it's a great way to exceed expectations. Now, if you work with someone for an extended period of time, and every time they challenge you, you are able to adapt, does that then foster the expectation in them that they don't need to give you that much advance notice on stuff?
Yeah.
Or actually, if they've got a disruption, they can push it on to you because you'll be able to manage it if they can't manage it themselves? And
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
So that is exactly what I was implying from earlier on in our chat, which you picked up on. It's an interesting one, because I have had challenges in the past as a person who is an organizer and a problem solver that wants to help people. So I've then done that more and more, and that the big danger there is it can create a dependency from others on you, which I think is what you're talking about. So that's the potential downside, that if you are the person that's always adapting, and you're the person that is organizing things and sorting out problems for people, if you like, because I think they're linked, then people will then start to potentially rely on you more and more, and it may be that you're not helping others actually in that sense. I mean, that I think that's maybe slightly different from what you were initially saying with potentially a business client, but I think they are linked. There's still a dependency that they might create with you, which potentially makes your life more difficult, and they don't need to put as much effort in, which is probably not a good thing.
And I think there's another element to this, which is a very tricky thing, because it can sound like complaining, but I think it helps to make people aware of the effort it costs you to adapt. It takes you to adapt. Yeah. Because I realized this actually yesterday, day before yesterday, where a client asked me, right, this is 3 minutes before the meeting starts. He says, oh, this user interview that we were going to do has to be rescheduled, because the person has some personal issues, can't be there. This happens. You know?
Absolutely.
And he said, well, can we do it tomorrow before the session for which we need this input. And I said, I mean, I can do the same time that we had initially scheduled tomorrow, or I could potentially do an hour later, but that's not ideal for me. Now, my client initially said, oh, okay, then maybe we'll do an hour later. What I meant by is not ideal for me is I will have to cancel and reschedule 2 meetings. I didn't say that, but that's what I meant, and I was going to do that because those were internal meetings which I can more easily cancel and reschedule. I then told him, actually, if you want, we can also do it half an hour later rather than an hour later, because then I only have to cancel 1 meeting.
Yeah.
Which is then the option that we ended up choosing, but I think that gives, it's an assumption on my behalf, but it gives him in that case a bit more of an appreciation of the effort I'm going through.
Yes.
Without necessarily whinging about the fact that, oh, he's making me reschedule things. Because then if you're complaining too much about the fact that you're having to be flexible, you're taking away all the benefit of being flexible. But yes, I mean, to a certain extent, you're making people dependent on you, which can be great, but you need to make sure that you're not putting too much strain on yourself. Because, you know, I know for myself, it happens quite often that then every now and then I'm working on an evening or a weekend to catch up on stuff just because I've agreed to pick up the slack from project XYZ because I think it's worthwhile. But if people are not aware of that and they're all working 9 to 5 and they're expecting you to also work 9 to 5, then they don't understand. They don't understand what they're asking of you when then that becomes the norm.
Exactly.
So,
and I fortunately, in some ways, and unfortunately, I have a high tolerance to that, and I am, let's say, poor at communicating sometimes the extra effort I put in to make things happen. And that's an issue with my own communication rather than other people. So I totally agree with what you're saying there. It's actually only fair that you communicate some of the extra effort it might have taken to do things, because some people would be potentially upset if they knew how much extra effort you were making to do certain tasks that they'd caused you a disruption on, for example.
And another one that I sometimes do is, this is especially when you have an interaction or a relationship with someone that lasts for a slightly longer period of time, is it rarely ever happens that you're able to compromise. Well, there is actually already that you're able to adapt without having to compromise something else. So, you know, if I'm adapting within a workshop to a question that you've asked, and I had planned out my 4-hour workshop and we're now going to spend half an hour on this, that means we're spending half an hour less on something else. Same goes for, you know, outside work, is if we're saying, okay, you want me to now do this extra piece of work, I only have 24 hours in a day, so that means something's got to give. And that has helped me quite a lot, to help people also understand what they're asking of you in terms of flexibility. If you're doing it on a more recurring basis, let's say, which means that I tell them, you now have a choice. If you want me to do this thing, I have to either drop this or this thing, or the quality of that other thing is going to decrease. And that, I think that also helps to set some boundaries and set some realistic expectations, let's say. All right. Any closing thoughts?
No, I think that was a good process getting to that point, and Thank you for putting those on the board there. I think they're all really relevant points to this discussion.
Cool. I'm very curious to see whether this is useful to people.
We
We'll
will see.
We will see indeed.